For 20 years, Red Skelton amused millions of people on television. He portrayed the innocent child, the goofy drunk, and the joyful clown. The group he worked with, however, knew someone else. It was dubbed the dirty hour of the Red Skelton. His career would have been ruined by what transpired during those private rehearsals. A provision in his will that could have wiped out his whole inheritance was found by attorneys after his death. No one could have predicted the darker reality of America's favorite clown. Red Skelton was born with a lot on his shoulders. 2 months after his father's passing, on July 18, 1913, he was born in Vincennes, Indiana. Before becoming a grocer, his father, Joseph Ahart, was a circus clown. But bad luck struck. The exact world he had attempted to escape, a circus tent collapse, claimed his life. Red's family was devastated by that one catastrophe. They had no resources, no help, and no hope for the future. In a home filled with sorrow and despair, his mother, Ida May, was left to raise 4 children by herself. They lived in terrible poverty. It wasn't just a whisper in the neighborhood. They gave a straightforward description. Ida accepted any work she could find since she was so impoverished. She washed floors. She operated elevators. Even when it broke her, she persisted. Not only was Red's family impoverished, people thought they were hopeless. Because they believed Red was going nowhere, the town's parents advised their girls to avoid him. Those statements and remarks stayed with him, yet they pushed him rather than broke him. Red started working as a newsboy when he was just 7 years old. His family needed the money, so he stood on the streets of Vincennes shouting headlines, not because he enjoyed it. Each coin was useful. He observed others, read their expressions, and discovered a way to make them smile. He learned more from that work than from school. He sold more than simply papers. He developed his performance skills. He discovered that laughter attracted notice. He would never forget that lesson. Then, at the age of 10, an incredible event occurred. Ed Wynn, a well-known comedian, saw him peddling newspapers outside the Pantheon Theater. Wynn took Red inside after purchasing all of his papers. He gave him more than a few bucks. A new universe was opened by him. Wynn gave Red a backstage tour of entertainment business. It was quick, bright, and thrilling. And then a door suddenly opened for a young boy who had no father and no future. Red had the dream because of that one moment. He gave it a fierce chase. Red left school immediately after meeting Wynn. He did not enter show business lightly. When he was 10 years old, he jumped right in and joined Doc Lewis's patent medicine show. The shows weren't glitzy. They had elements of a touring circus and a sales pitch. Red made people laugh while riding across Indiana, Arkansas, Illinois, and Missouri to help peddle phony remedies. He didn't behave like a child, even if he was one. He learned what it meant to be a performer by working night after night like a grown man. When Red reached 14, he entered the world of traveling theater, joining the John Lawrence Stock Company, and being cast in serious plays under tents. His mother reportedly remarked, "Red didn't run away from home. His destiny caught up with him." He earned $15 a week, which seemed like a fortune, but something wasn't right. Red tried hard to be serious, but every time he said something dramatic, the audience laughed. He was supposed to make them cry, but instead they found him funny. The company also noticed, so they decided to fire him, leaving him alone and unpaid in a cheap hotel by the Missouri River. Red persisted, and a few days later he discovered the Cotton Blossom, a stern-he showboat, floating down the river, still holding on to the bygone era of river entertainment. Red talked his way in, and he did everything on that boat, danced, sang, joked, and even wore blackface like other performers of the era. That boat saved him, and it trained him better than any school could. Red was no longer a beginner at 15, a working vaudeville performer, and every night presented a new challenge. He had to win over every crowd. He learned to shift quickly, work hard, and never let a quiet audience remain silent for long. In addition to following in his father's footsteps as a clown, he had performed in medicine shows, showboats, burlesque circuits, blackface minstrel acts, and even the circus. He never stayed still. Sometimes MCED dance marathons during the Depression era, where couples danced until they passed out for money. While most children his age were learning in classrooms, Red was learning on stages, under intense scrutiny. And he did whatever it took to keep going and working. In 1930, Kansas City brought him Edna Stillwell, a 16-year-old usher at the Pantages Theater. Edna entered a dance marathon that Red was hosting, and she won. She also told Red that his jokes weren't good enough, which caught his attention. They were married a year later, and Edna became more than just his wife. She was his manager. His writer and his protector, she helped him study for a diploma. She wrote his jokes. Their greatest breakthrough came from a simple diner in Montreal, where they saw people dipping donuts into coffee. That strange little habit gave them the idea to create the Dough Dunkers sketch, a pantomime act in which Red depicted various ways people dunked donuts. She continued writing for him even after their divorce 13 years later, because she knew his rhythm better than anyone else. They were finally in the big leagues after that one sketch propelled Red into radio, film, and even the White House, where he was invited to perform by President Roosevelt. Red was soon hosting Roosevelt's birthday parties. It was both brilliant and ridiculous, and audiences adored it. In 1937, New York booked them at Loew's State Theater. In 1937, Red Skelton's career took a significant turn when he made his first radio appearance. After years of touring vaudeville circuits, his Donut Dunkers routine on the Fleshman's Yeast Hour, with Rudy Vallee, was a simple pantomime routine that lit up the airwaves and received an overwhelming response. Fan letters flooded in, and he was asked back twice more that year. Red was suddenly more than just a stage actor. He was a radio star, and in October 1938, NBC officially recognized his status as the new host of Avalon Time, replacing Red Foley. Much of the material behind the scenes was shaped by his wife, Edna. Red's voice work, characters, and physical comedy translated unexpectedly well to radio. It wasn't simply the next step. It was a leap into a new universe, and Red found himself right in the center of it. She wasn't just an assistant, she was his primary writer and creative collaborator. Their collaboration made Red stand out. Red was ready for something bigger by 1941. On October 7th, the Raleigh cigarette program began, and it quickly became a national sensation. It was in this program that Red introduced some of his most well-known characters, such as Junior, the mean little kid, who became a national obsession. His catchphrase, "I doed it," appeared everywhere, including in war headlines and newspapers. Children loved the character so much that they helped fund a bomber plane called We Dud It. Another creation, Clem Cadill Hopper, was based on a real neighbor from Indiana. Azie and Harriet Nelson joined the show, along with comedian Wonderful Smith. One even read, "Do Little Dude It" after the Diddle Raid. Their presence shaped the comedy of the show and gave it depth. Red's time on the big screen began earlier, with his first appearance in a light comedy set in a summer camp in 1938. And his run ended in June 1944, when he was drafted into the Army. But by then, he had made a lasting impression on American culture. He co-starred with Ginger Rogers and Douglas Fairbanks, Jr. as the camp's chaotic social director, Itchy Fallner. Although most of his scenes were cut, Red still left an impression because of his timing and energy, which was sufficient. The film made over $1 million, which was more than its $966,000 budget. Though it wasn't a blockbuster, it opened doors, and his trademark routines such as the Dough It dunking bit were also gaining recognition in Hollywood. Red then established himself as a mainstay at MGM, appearing in over 30 films between 1938 and 1951, including Ship Ahoy in 1941, which starred him with Burt Lau and Eleanor Powell, and Bathing Beauty in 1944. Bathing Beauty was particularly famous for its vivid Technicolor scenes and intricate swimming sequences choreographed by Busby Berkeley. It was originally written for Red, but is remembered for making Esther Williams a star. He played a door-to-door salesman entangled in a murder plot in The Fuller Brush Man in 1948. The year the Raleigh cigarette program started, Red also starred in Whistling in the Dark. And it was a big year. His style was unique, warm, silly, and full of heart, and audiences loved the way his characters combined humor and emotion. Red was one of MGM's most dependable comedy stars through the 1940s. Red's clean humor, which appealed to all age groups, no dirty jokes, no politics, just funny, odd characters you could laugh at with your kids or your parents, was what set him apart and kept him in the spotlight when he was chosen as the top new radio star of 1941. This was no small accomplishment, as he faced off against such greats as Fred Allen and Jack Benny. Red was at the height of his radio career at the time, with the Raleigh cigarette program airing every Tuesday night at 10:30 and one of the highest-rated shows in the nation. His sponsors, including MGM, didn't want to lose him. But everything changed again in March 1944, when he was drafted into the Army. His final show aired on June 6, 1944, and the very next day he was promoted to Private Skelton, and the adventures of Azie and Harriet took over his time slot. Suddenly, one of America's favorite voices vanished from the airwaves. The war did not spare Red any special treatment. He trained like any other soldier. But there was a twist. He was often being asked to perform. He performed in a lot of comedy shows 12 in a day, in between drills, which occasionally wore him out quickly. He wrote in his diary that he felt faint during one of the shows, and that he lost some of his act. In April 1945, he was sent to Italy, where he performed 41 shows in 6 days. The soldiers adored him, and the chaplain said he lifted their spirits. But Red was running on fumes, his body and mind giving out. Then he collapsed in Naples, and they rushed him home and admitted him to a military hospital, where he remained for 3 months. Red was shaken on the inside and got a stutter. He was no longer the man who jumped between characters with ease. One day in the hospital, he saw a fellow soldier who refused to talk, so Red tried to make him laugh. That brief moment helped him begin to heal, but the scars remained. The public never really heard what happened. The newspapers gave it a gentle touch. After being officially released in September 1945, he joked that he was the only famous person to enter and exit a private institution. But it wasn't a joke. Red didn't take the easy route, didn't ask for a desk job or a Hollywood unit, and it changed him. The stutter lingered, and the breakdown had long-lasting effects. When he signed his discharge papers on September 24th, the war chapter was over. But something inside him had changed forever. Red didn't waste time, though, and 10 weeks after leaving the Army, on December 4th, 1945, he was back on the air with the Raleigh cigarette program, to the ecstatic delight of his fans. When Red Skelton's show debuted on NBC on September 30, 1951, it didn't just fill another time slot. It exploded onto television screens. His new characters had a deeper edge, reflecting someone who had been through something. His closest friends and family noticed the difference. Red was still sharp and funny, but now there was something darker beneath the surface. He withdrew more frequently and laughed less off stage. In the first episode, Red ended his monologue by being yanked off stage by 2 invisible hands. Red was already a radio and movie star, and millions of people were excited to see how he would perform on television. The nation watched live as his well-known comedy took on new life, thanks to a new technology called the coaxial cable, which allowed people across the U.S. to watch the broadcast at the same time. The impact of that episode was enormous. By the end of its first season, the show was number 4 across all networks. And Red won Best Comedian, and his show won Best Comedy at the 1952 Emmy Awards, defeating Milton Berle, who had always held the top spot. It was a hilarious bit, but it caused real injuries, and he had to drop it later. It was the beginning of something great. Red Skelton would influence American laughter for the next 20 years. Red made the wise decision to move his show to CBS in 1954, which allowed him more freedom and airtime. By 1962, the show had grown to a full hour and was a staple of Tuesday evenings for families all over the nation. Red not only led in comedy but also pushed the boundaries of technology, and between 1955 and 1960, he paid for color broadcasts himself, despite CBS's hesitancy to switch over. The show was a hit and remained in the top 20 for almost 20 years, even reaching number 2 in national ratings in the mid-1960s. Even though Red's audience was still strong, CBS canceled it in 1970 because they wanted younger viewers, and Red's older audience didn't fit the network's new plans. The cancellation was a shock to fans and industry insiders alike, serving as a stark reminder that even legends can be swept aside. Early in the TV run, Red created one of his most beloved characters, Freddy the Freeloader, a silent clown who lived in a shack and was always smiling despite having very little. Red poured his heart into Freddy, who wasn't just a character. He was based on Red's memories of his father, a circus clown before he passed away. Red once described Freddy as the purest of all his creations, and the sketches in which Freddy remained silent, known as the silent spot, became a mainstay of the show. Red used his face, his hands, and his movements to tell complete stories without a word. Freddy never complained, and he always had faith that something positive would happen, even when things seemed hopeless. Years after Red's main show ended, Freddy eventually received his own HBO special in 1981, demonstrating that the character was still a popular one. Red gave audiences hope through Freddy, in addition to laughter, but behind the scenes, Red's life took a tragic turn when his son Richard passed away from leukemia on May 10, 1958, just 10 days before his 10th birthday. Red and Georgia tried to shield Richard from the truth, but his small body was unable to withstand the constant transfusions. And in his last hours, with the fourth in his leg and bruises all over him, Richard asked his father for one last favor. "Daddy, will you get Mama that red blanket for Mother's Day?" It wasn't intended for him. His final words before he went into a coma were, "It was for my mother." Red and Georgia remained by his side in the hospital room for more than an hour, surrounded by his toys and the stuffed dog he had loved since he was 6 years old. Georgia later said she had repressed her tears until that point. He passed away at 8:36 p.m. She finally broke down that night after Richard had asked her not to cry during her visit. Red brought a Sears catalog to the hospital on Richard's last full day, telling him to let Richard choose anything he wanted for his birthday. The boy picked out a tent, camping equipment, and that red blanket, but it wasn't for him. That red blanket became a symbol of his love and remained with Georgia for the rest of her life. It was for his mother. He also stated that he wanted a cookout with a few friends rather than a large party. The moment made clear everything about Richard's identity and his significance to his parents. The grief didn't remain private forever. It began to show up in his work and his marriage. Fred and Georgia grew apart. They had held each other together for Richard's sake. Red couldn't bear to touch his room after Richard's death, so he left it exactly as it was. The toys remained. The packed bag remained. He frequently sat in there alone, quietly sinking into depression. Red's comedy changed after he left, and even though he continued to perform, it was difficult to ignore the sadness in his eyes. The room turned into a shrine, a place where the clown could cry and store all the memories he was unable to talk about. Eventually, their marriage ended. When Red was 5 years old, he began traveling with his mother while she worked in a circus, which became his world after his father, a clown, passed away before Red was born. Red painted clowns, some happy, some lonely, but these weren't just any paintings. They were related to the characters he had portrayed, including Freddy. Most fans were unaware that Red was also a serious painter. Red's paintings sold for more than $80,000 each by the 1980s, and his lithographs brought in millions of dollars a year. According to some art experts, his paintings brought in more money than television, and his work ended up in private collections all over the world. It was a second career that few people saw coming, but it had always existed, just below the surface. Red had another secret. Despite never drinking, he was well known for portraying drunks on stage, and his Guzzler's gin joke helped begin his TV career. Despite the fact that he was allergic to alcohol and couldn't even sip it, viewers were convinced he had first-hand experience with it, which didn't stop him from honing his act. That image of the wholesome clown didn't always match the man backstage. He learned by observing real drunks in the streets, and he copied their slurred words, shaky steps, and unpredictable moves with astonishing accuracy. It was all performance, none of it real. His act fooled millions, and it demonstrated just how deep his talent ran. Red would often rant on every subject, including ones he would never discuss on air. During rehearsals with Martha Ray and other friends, his third wife, Lothian, once remarked that Red had a special place in his head for jokes that people weren't supposed to understand. These private sessions became legendary among the crew and were dubbed the Red Skelton Dirty Hour. It was like a pressure valve. He presented one version of himself to the world, but he also needed to laugh in private, even if it was a darker version. Red Skelton lit up American television for almost 20 years, with his show ranking in the top 10 for the majority of those years, and at number 7 during its final season on CBS. But none of that mattered in 1970. CBS canceled the Red Skelton show. In any case, the network's decision to sever ties with anything it deemed too old or too rural, known as the rural purge, was motivated by image rather than ratings. In a single sweep, they fired not only Skelton but also the Beverly Hillbillies, Green Acres, and Mayberry. RFD Red Skelton was one of the millions of devoted fans left behind when this harsh change in television history replaced family favorites with edgier shows like All in the Family and Maz H. CBS. President Fred Silverman didn't bat an eye. He wanted younger urban audiences. The ratings didn't matter. The legacy didn't matter. The audience loyalty meant nothing. Red was devastated, not just disappointed. He was performing in Las Vegas when he received the news, and he said, "My heart has been broken." His show had been in the top 10 for 17 of his 20 years on television. But CBS didn't care, because they looked at demographic data rather than decades of service. According to his wife, Lothian, Red never fully recovered from that betrayal. NBC attempted to bring him back for one more season in 1970, but they changed everything. He told Lothian, I'm mad that they didn't understand that I still had something to give." He continued to perform, doing up to 70 live shows annually. But the pain of being thrown aside by an industry he helped create never went away. The show's duration was reduced from 1 hour to 30 minutes. It was rescheduled from Tuesday nights to Mondays. The set was made chilly and dark, and a group of young actors were added to break the flow. The audience sensed the change, and what had seemed natural now seemed forced. The ratings fell, and it didn't even make it into the top 30. Red Skeleton's time on weekly television ended when NBC canned the show in the spring of 1971. Red refused to give in to vulgarity and never added shock or profanity to his act. So it wasn't just the show that failed, but the relationship he had developed with the audience that couldn't be replicated. I'm not going to have my audience and their mothers, fathers, children, and grandchildren hear me recite what they can read on bathroom walls. At a time when other comics were adapting, Red stuck to clean humor, which made him seem outdated to some. But he didn't care. He continued to perform on stage, because his audience deserved respect. Then came a surprise no one anticipated. In 1980, 13 of his former writers filed a lawsuit. He continued to tour colleges, clubs, and charity events, and people continued to show up, laugh, and love him. He demonstrated that wholesome comedy could still be successful. They discovered that Red had included a clause in his will that, if followed, would mean no reruns, no syndication, and no residuals for the writers erasing decades of work. Red claimed that he wrote the clause during a dark period, when he felt abandoned by the industry. But the backlash forced him to reconsider. "Would you burn the only monument you've built in more than 20 years?" he subsequently asked. Red Skeleton's personal life was also full of suffering, but that occurrence showed how much pain he still held. Eventually, he permitted some episodes to be kept. His change of heart spared his legacy and protected the writer's work. Georgia Davis, his ex-wife, killed herself with a gun in the backyard of her Rancho Mirage, California, home on May 10, 1976. The date was significant because it was the anniversary of the death of their son Richard, who had died of leukemia at the age of 10 in 1958. Georgia never recovered from the loss and struggled with depression and alcoholism. Their marriage ended in divorce in 1971. She had been shot in the chest with a .38 in Las Vegas, 10 years prior in 1966, which was also shrouded in mystery. Red withdrew from the spotlight for over 10 years after her death, and his grief consumed him. He remarried in 1973. Red, 60, and Lothian Toland, 36, moved to a quiet ranch in Anza, California, where they raised horses and cared for bonsai trees. They avoided Hollywood and the commotion, and Lothian became his source of calm. Red wrote her letters every day. Lothian was the daughter of legendary cinematographer Greg Toland. Even without television, Red never stopped entertaining, performing about 70 shows annually at Carnegie Hall, college auditoriums, and casinos. She kept them, discovering some only after he passed away. She remained out of the spotlight but assumed the responsibility of protecting his memory. But behind the scenes, the sadness and grief never went away. He poured them into his work, and every smile he offered the audience was earned through personal sorrow. He began painting and went wherever people would laugh. He painted clowns, which collectors adored, and some of his paintings sold for over $80. His art brought him up to $2.5 million annually. Red Skelton passed away at the age of 84 on September 17, 1997, from pneumonia at Eisenhower Medical Center in Rancho Mirage. His last years were quiet but not unproductive. He painted, performed, and worked. But he never fully recovered from losing Georgia or his son. Friends said he never fully regained his joy. In 2013, Red's hometown of Vincennes, Indiana, opened the Red Skeleton Museum of American Comedy on July 18th, which would have been his 100th birthday. His clown paintings, which were often bright on the outside but carried something darker underneath, were portraits of a man who lived to make others laugh while privately grieving. Located on Vincennes' university campus, the museum is more than just a museum. It houses his scripts, costumes, rare footage, more than 200 paintings, and even personal items that Lothian donated. The museum also hosts events such as the Laughter Film Festival and the America's Clown Award. Today, the Red Skeleton Research Archive is owned by the Indiana Historical Society. It contains thousands of scripts, photos, and musical scores, all of which contribute to the preservation of Red's legacy. Red's characters such as Clem Cadile Hopper, Freddie the Freeloader, and the Mean Little Kid were more than just jokes. They had heart and life, and his style influenced comedy. His work continues to reverberate across culture, his laughter endures, and his legacy endures. Robin Williams, Jim Carrey, and others look to him as a mentor. The Red Skelton Show ran for 20 years, won many Emmys, and became a fixture in homes across the nation.